At the beginning of 2024, the geopolitical landscape of the Eurasian continent is undergoing dramatic shifts, with four dominant players: Europe, Russia, India, and China, vying for influence and power. These nations are not only striving to maintain their global presence but also seeking to position themselves as ideological leaders who can shape the future of humanity. Among them, China, with its formidable economy and strategic global outreach, aims to consolidate its influence worldwide. Europe, despite facing internal divisions and growing uncertainties, also aspires to retain its leadership role. However, it is important to acknowledge that China is unlikely to emerge as the definitive global leader, an issue that warrants a separate discussion. On the other side of the Atlantic, the United States remains a formidable force, upholding its influence through military dominance. Historically, America has employed military strength as a fundamental tool to sustain its global authority. This principle, which dates back to the 17th century when European warlords settled their disputes through warfare, has remained unchanged over time. Back then, power was established not through diplomacy or dialogue but through force. Today, the United States continues to adhere to this approach, believing that military might is the ultimate determinant of global authority. The shifting tides of geopolitics suggest that two players in particular, China and Europe, harbor ambitions of shaping the global order. China, with its economic prowess and aspirations for worldwide dominance, and Europe, which seeks to maintain the illusion of unity and influence, are both contenders in this high-stakes competition. However, China's potential to assume the role of a global leader remains doubtful. Europe, too, faces significant challenges that hinder its ability to sustain its once dominant position on the world stage. Meanwhile, the United States, long regarded as the master of the geopolitical game, continues to exert its influence by leveraging military superiority. Throughout history, the American approach to power has revolved around ensuring dominance through strategic military expansion. The belief that military strength guarantees global authority remains deeply ingrained in the nation's political philosophy. This principle has shaped U.S. foreign policy for centuries, dating back to the era when European powers established their empires through conquest and colonization. However, the world is evolving, and the traditional rules of global politics are undergoing significant transformations. The established power structures that have dictated international affairs for decades are being challenged, and new dynamics are emerging. European strategists, entrenched in outdated geopolitical frameworks, have failed to recognize the extent to which the world has changed. The assumption that the global order will continue to conform to traditional Western-centric models is no longer valid. The global community has long abandoned the belief that Western powers dictate the course of history. As the geopolitical landscape undergoes profound changes, the United States finds itself navigating a world that no longer adheres to its established rules. The ability to project power and influence in a rapidly evolving environment requires adaptability. The American strategy of promoting its interests while maintaining the facade of moral superiority is becoming increasingly transparent. The portrayal of the U.S. as a beacon of success, despite its economic challenges and social inequalities, has been masterfully crafted. Even as the realities of internal decline become more apparent, the American narrative continues to command global attention. A crucial turning point in Eurasian geopolitics occurred in 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Prior to that, there was a single center of power on the continent, and its ideological influence was undisputed. At that time, the notion of supplying weapons to different regions of the USSR was inconceivable, as the world operated under a fundamentally different paradigm. However, as history has demonstrated, times change, and with them, the rules of engagement evolve. Alliances that once seemed unshakable have fractured, former adversaries have become allies, and long-standing strategies have lost their effectiveness. Given these shifting realities, it may be time for Europe to reconsider its approach to Russia. Historically, European nations have been reluctant to engage in meaningful partnerships with Russia, largely due to their alignment with the United States. This hesitancy is rooted in historical experiences and the memory of past conflicts, which continue to shape Western perceptions of Russia. From a Western perspective, regardless of ethnic or cultural distinctions, individuals from the East are often categorized under a singular Russian identity. This perception has been shaped by centuries of political rivalry, ideological confrontation, and persistent propaganda. Looking at the broader geopolitical picture, the United States remains a dominant global power, boasting the largest economy, the most advanced military capabilities, and a vast network of alliances that reinforce its strategic influence. American geopolitical ambitions have always been driven by the pursuit of territorial and economic expansion. The discussions surrounding the acquisition of territories such as Greenland and Canada reflect a broader strategy aimed at consolidating American dominance. However, these ambitions are not necessarily aimed at undermining the sovereignty of these territories but rather at securing strategic advantages that further strengthen the United States' global standing. Europe, on the other hand, is gradually losing its strategic significance in the eyes of American policymakers. The continent, once a critical component of global power structures, has seen its role diminish due to economic stagnation, demographic challenges, and internal discord. Many of the industries and technological advancements that once defined European economic strength have been relocated to other regions, primarily in Asia. As a result, Europe's contribution to global economic and technological progress is steadily declining. Despite maintaining relatively high standards in healthcare and education, Europe's overall prosperity has diminished. Access to quality medical care is increasingly dependent on financial means, and even in countries with well-developed healthcare systems, the strain on resources is becoming evident. While European educational institutions continue to uphold high academic standards, they no longer position the continent as the epicenter of global innovation. As a result, Europe is increasingly perceived as a liability rather than an asset in global geopolitics. Furthermore, Europe's military capabilities have significantly declined over the years. According to NATO reports, most European nations fail to meet their defense spending commitments, and stockpiles of ammunition and heavy equipment have been significantly depleted. The disparity in military production is evident when comparing Europe's output to that of North Korea, which, despite its smaller population, produces more artillery shells in 3 months than the entire European continent does in a year. Additionally, Europe remains heavily reliant on American-made weaponry, further highlighting its dependence on the United States for military security. In the event that the United States were to annex Canada and Greenland, it would become the largest country in the world by land area, surpassing Russia. This expansion would also grant the United States access to vast natural resources, including oil reserves that could rival or even surpass those of Russia. The Arctic, with its untapped energy resources and strategic importance, is already a focal point of geopolitical competition among major powers such as the United States, Russia, Canada, Norway, and China. Control over Arctic trade routes and resource-rich territories has become a critical objective for global superpowers. The growing instability in Europe further underscores the continent's diminishing influence. Brexit has already demonstrated that individual nations can operate independently of the European Union, challenging the notion of European unity. The EU, once perceived as a bastion of democracy and progress, is increasingly viewed as a bureaucratic entity disconnected from the real concerns of its citizens. The loss of public trust in EU institutions raises questions about the long-term viability of the European project. As the global power balance continues to shift, an intriguing paradox emerges. Russia, historically regarded as a destabilizing force in Europe, is now positioned as a potential stabilizer. With Europe facing internal turmoil and the United States prioritizing its own strategic interests, Russia possesses the economic, military, and energy resources necessary to influence the balance of power on the continent. This does not necessarily imply direct confrontation, but rather the potential for Russia to serve as a counterweight in global geopolitics. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the geopolitical landscape is undergoing a profound transformation. Traditional alliances are being re-evaluated, power dynamics are shifting, and the world is no longer governed by the same rules that defined previous eras. In this evolving scenario, Russia's role as a stabilizing force in Europe may become an unexpected reality. Whether European leaders recognize this opportunity and adapt accordingly remains to be seen, but the decisions made in the coming years will undoubtedly shape the future of global politics.